The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun still warm. Min-jae stared at the woman across the table, this stranger in a wrinkled diner uniform who had just named something he'd spent 40 years trying not to feel. The absence of it. The lack. The hole where pain should have lived. "You don't know me," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, rough like something unused. Alani didn't live away. That was the thing. She kept looking at him like he was a person, not a predator, like the danger radiating from his suit, his security, his very presence was simply irrelevant. "I know enough," she said quietly. "I know men who are comfortable with themselves don't sit alone at 4 a.m. staring at their own reflection in the window. I know men who've won at life don't order coffee like it's medicine they have to swallow." She tilted her head, those warm eyes studying him. "And I know the only people who look as empty as you looked when you walked in here are people who've forgotten what they're missing." Min-jae's security shifted behind him. Tony, his head of operations, stepped forward. "Boss, we have the meeting." Min-jae raised his hand. The gesture was automatic, reflexive, but different this time. Before, he'd silenced them because the situation was unusual. Now, he silenced them because he didn't want the interruption, didn't want this moment to end. "Why do you care?" he asked Alani. She considered the question like it deserved actual consideration. Not many people did that, treated his questions like they mattered. Usually people answered fast, eager to please, eager to escape. "Because I've been where you are," she said finally. "Different circumstances, same hole." Min-jae studied her differently now, the tired eyes beneath the warm smile, the way her shoulders carried something heavy even when she laughed, the small apartment she probably went home to after shifts like this one, the brother she mentioned once in passing, the one she was trying to keep out of trouble. "What happened to you?" he asked. Alani smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. "That's a story for another night, if you come back." She stood, picked up the coffee pot, and walked away. Didn't wait for his response, didn't ask permission to leave, just left him sitting there with something moving in his chest that hadn't moved in decades. Min-jae sat in the diner until the sun came up. The cook woke, shuffled out, started breakfast service. New customers wandered in. Truck drivers, night shift workers, the early morning crowd that had no idea a man who ran half the city's underworld was sitting in the corner booth, nursing cold coffee, feeling something he couldn't name. When he finally stood, his legs felt strange, unsteady, like he'd been sitting so long he'd forgotten how to move. Tony met him at the door. "Boss, we have the meeting with the Japanese delegation at noon, and the situation in Gangnam needs—" "I'll be there," Min-jae said. But he didn't move. He stood in the doorway, watching Alani work the counter, watching her laugh with a truck driver, watching her move through the world like she belonged in it. "She's dangerous," Tony said quietly. Min-jae turned to look at his head of security. Tony had been with him for 12 years, had seen him walk through gunfire without flinching, had watched him break bones and take hits and never, ever show weakness. "What do you mean?" Tony hesitated. That alone was unusual. Tony never hesitated. "I mean," he said slowly, "that in 12 years I've never seen you look at anything the way you just looked at her. And in our world, boss, caring about something is how you get hurt." Min-jae looked back at Alani. She was wiping down the counter, humming something soft, completely unaware that she'd just become the center of a Mafia boss's universe. "You're right," Min-jae said. "Caring is how you get hurt." He stepped out into the morning light. "I'll let you know when I start caring." But they both knew the truth. The crack was already there, and once ice cracks, it never goes back to the way it was. That night, Min-jae lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, hearing 8 words echo through his skull like a song he couldn't stop humming. Someone who forgot they're allowed to hurt. He hadn't cried since he was 8 years old, hadn't mourned his mother when she died, hadn't felt the loss of men who'd served him for years, hadn't experienced anything but the cold, flat line of existence without sensation. But lying there in the dark, something pressed at the back of his eyes. Something wet. Something terrifying. He didn't cry yet, but for the first time in 40 years, he felt like he might. The next Tuesday, he was back in the booth at 3:47 a.m. Alani saw him the moment he walked in. Didn't rush over. Didn't play games. Just finished what she was doing, walked over with the coffee pot, and refilled his cup like he'd never left. "You came back," she said. "You knew I would." She smiled, that real smile, the one that reached her eyes. "Yeah, I did." She sat down across from him, without asking, without fear, without any of the things everyone else in his life brought to the table. "You want to know what happened to me?" she asked. Min-jae nodded, not trusting his voice. Alani looked down at her hands, strong hands, capable hands, hands that had worked their whole lives. "My little brother DJ, he's 18 now, runs with stupid people, 6 months ago, he owed money to some bad men, the kind of men who don't send reminders." She looked up, and for the first time, Min-jae saw something flicker in her eyes that matched what lived in his. Loss, pain, the kind of hurt that doesn't go away. "I paid it, every dollar I had. And when that wasn't enough, I paid in other ways." She touched her wrist briefly, unconsciously, where a bruise might have faded. "They left me alone after that. But DJ, he never learned. He's in trouble again, bigger this time." Min-jae felt something tighten in his chest, something that felt almost like anger. "Why are you telling me this?" Alani met his eyes, held them. "I see you, Cha Min-jae. I don't know who you are or what you do, but I know power when I see it, and I know you could help me if you wanted to." The silence stretched between them. Outside, the city slept. Inside, two people sat across from each other, both carrying holes nothing had ever filled. "What would you give?" Min-jae asked quietly. Alani didn't hesitate. "Anything. Everything. Whatever it takes." Min-jae studied her, this woman who'd walked into his life with 8 words and turned everything upside down. This woman who saw him when no one else could. This woman who was asking him to be the one thing he'd never been. A protector. "I'll look into it," he said quietly. It was the most dangerous promise he'd ever made, because looking into it meant caring, and caring meant he could finally, for the first time in 40 years, be hurt. He stood to leave, paused at the door, turned back. "Alani," she looked up. "What you said about forgetting I'm allowed to hurt." He held her gaze. "I didn't forget. I never knew." He walked out before she could respond. But he felt her watching him through the window as his car pulled away, felt something warm in his chest that hadn't been there before. 40 years of ice, and one woman with 8 words was melting it all away.
The blade should have stopped him. It slid between his ribs with a sound like tearing paper, slick, wet, final. The man holding it grinned, victory already flashing in his eyes. That grin lasted exactly 1 second before confusion replaced it, because Cha Min-jae didn't stagger, didn't scream, didn't even flinch. He simply looked down at the knife protruding from his side, then back at the man holding it, and his expression never changed. "You're done," Min-jae said quietly. The man's hand trembled on the hilt. Behind him, 2 associates watched in horror, their courage evaporating like morning fog. They'd planned this ambush for weeks, caught him alone, they thought, caught him vulnerable. But the man with the knife in his ribs wasn't bleeding out, wasn't collapsing, wasn't doing any of the things men were supposed to do when steel pierced vital organs. He was just standing there, waiting. Min-jae's hand moved, not fast, not desperate, just efficient. He gripped the man's wrist, twisted until bone cracked, and removed the knife from his own body like he was pulling a splinter from a finger. No grimace, no gasp, no blood rushing any faster than it had a moment ago. The man screamed. Min-jae watched. "I'll ask once. Who sent you?" 20 seconds later, he had his answer. 30 seconds after that, he was walking away, leaving 3 broken men in an alley who would carry the story of what they'd seen for the rest of their lives. The monster who couldn't be hurt, the devil who felt nothing. His men met him at the alley's entrance. Tony's eyes went straight to the blood soaking Min-jae's shirt. "Boss, it's fine. Boss, that's a lot of blood." Min-jae looked down at himself, almost surprised. The blood was spreading, warm and wet against his skin. But warm was just temperature. Wet was just sensation. Neither was pain. I said, "It's fine." Tony fell silent. They all did. They'd learned years ago that arguing with him was useless. He didn't feel what they felt, didn't react how they reacted. Sometimes they wondered if he was human at all. The drive back to his penthouse was quiet. Min-jae watched Seoul slide past the tinted windows, neon signs, late-night crowds, couples laughing outside bars. Living their lives, feeling their feelings. He felt nothing watching them, just the familiar emptiness that had become his only constant companion. His penthouse was exactly as he'd left it, floor-to-ceiling windows showing off a city that glittered like promises, a kitchen stocked with food he rarely ate, a bed large enough for two that had never held anyone for long. He stripped off his bloody shirt in the bathroom, examined the wound in the mirror. 4 inches below the ribs, clean entry, probably nicked something important based on the bleeding. He should feel something, should be staggering, gasping, dialing for help. Instead, he cleaned it with antiseptic, packed it with gauze, and taped it closed like he was fixing a torn jacket. The kitchen had a plate of food waiting. His housekeeper left meals even when he didn't ask, even when she knew he wouldn't eat. Tonight he sat down, picked up his chopsticks, and took a bite of the most expensive beef in the city. It tasted like texture, like chewing, like nothing. He put the chopsticks down. 40 years. 40 years since he fell from that tree at age 8, landed wrong, and watched his mother's face shift from terror to confusion as he stood up without crying. 40 years of doctors and tests and explanations he stopped listening to. Congenital analgesia, nerve damage, rare condition. They had words for it, but the words didn't change anything. The words didn't explain why he couldn't feel his mother's funeral, why he couldn't feel victories or losses, or the bodies of women who shared his bed and left disappointed by his silence, why he couldn't feel anything at all. He walked to the window, pressed his palm against the cold glass, and stared down at the city that feared him. Somewhere down there, people were living, hurting, loving, dying. He felt nothing. His phone buzzed. Tony, checking in. He ignored it. His eyes drifted to the clock. 2:47 a.m. Another night survived. Another morning approaching. Another day of being the man who couldn't be touched, couldn't be hurt, couldn't be reached. "Driver?" Min-jae said into the intercom. His voice sounded strange in the empty apartment. "Take the night off. I'm driving myself." "Why, sir? Is there somewhere you need to go?" Min-jae paused. Was there somewhere he needed to go? Somewhere he wanted to go? He hadn't wanted anything in so long the feeling was almost foreign. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'll know when I get there." He drove for an hour, through Gangnam's bright lights, through neighborhoods that got darker and smaller, through parts of the city he'd never seen because there was nothing there for him to take. He drove until the streets were unfamiliar and the buildings were run down, and the only light came from a single diner on a corner, its sign flickering like a heartbeat. 3:47 a.m. He parked, walked in, sat in a booth near the window. The diner was nearly empty. A cook slept in the back. A few truckers nursed coffee at the counter. And behind the register, a black woman with tired eyes and a warm smile looked up when the bell above the door chimed. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't show any of the fear he was used to seeing. She just grabbed a coffee pot and walked towards him like he was anyone, like he was a person. Min-jae watched her approach and felt something flicker in his chest. Not pain, not warmth, just movement, like ice cracking somewhere deep. He didn't know it yet, but that crack would never close. The fluorescent lights hummed like they were tired of humming, that same flicker every few seconds, the kind that usually drove people crazy, but tonight just added to the strange peace of the place. Min-jae sat in the corner booth, back to the wall, habit, not caution, and watched nothing through the window. His own reflection stared back at him, same face he'd seen for 40 years, same emptiness behind the eyes. The diner smelled like old grease and fresh coffee and something else he couldn't name. Comfort, maybe. He wouldn't know. Comfort wasn't something that lived in his world. A cook snored softly in the back, visible through the service window, apron stained and pillow made of folded arms. Two truckers sat at the counter, too tired to talk, just existing in each other's silence. A jukebox in the corner played nothing. Everything was quiet, still, suspended in the hour between late and early when the world forgot to be anything at all. Min-jae liked it. That surprised him. He hadn't liked anything in years. The door to the back swung open, and she emerged. Black woman, maybe early 30s, natural curls pulled back from her face, wrinkled uniform that had seen too many shifts, comfortable shoes that had walked too many miles. She moved like someone who'd learned to be tired without letting it show. She grabbed a coffee pot and started making rounds, topped off the truckers without waking them fully, wiped the counter without being asked. Then she turned toward the booths and saw him sitting alone in the corner. Min-jae waited for the flinch, the quick look away, the sudden memory of somewhere else she needed to be. It didn't come. She just walked over, coffee pot in hand, and refilled his cup like he was anyone, like he was a man sitting in a diner at 3:47 a.m., which she supposed he was. The coffee steamed in the cheap ceramic mug. She started to turn away. Then she stopped, turned back, and looked at him. Really looked. Not the quick scan most people did, assessing threat, calculating danger, figuring out how to escape. This was different. She looked at his eyes, really looked, like she was reading something written behind them, like she had permission to be there. Min-jae's jaw tightened. His hand, resting on the table, curled slightly. No one looked at him like that. No one dared. But she did. She studied his face, the sharp features, the perfect suit, the subtle scar near his eyebrow, the tension in his jaw that never fully released. She looked at the way he held himself, coiled and ready even while sitting still. She looked at the emptiness he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. And something in her expression shifted. Not fear, not recognition. Something softer, something that looked almost like pity? No, not pity. Understanding. She leaned forward slightly, close enough that her voice wouldn't carry, close enough that he could smell her, coffee and vanilla and something warm underneath. Her eyes held his, unwavering, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. 8 words. They landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outwards, touching things that hadn't been touched in decades. Min-jae felt something crack behind his ribs, not his wound, something deeper, something that had been frozen so long he'd forgotten it existed. His breath stopped. His hands went still. For the first time in 40 years, Cha Min-jae had no idea what to do next. The woman straightened, held his gaze one more moment, then walked away, back to the counter, back to her routine, like she hadn't just shattered something fundamental. The coffee steamed in front of him. The fluorescent lights hummed, the cook snored, the truckers slept, and Min-jae Cha sat alone in a rundown diner at 3:47 a.m., hearing 8 words echo through his skull, like a song he'd been waiting his whole life to hear.
Min-jae left the diner like the building was on fire. Not running, he didn't run, but walking fast enough that his driver, waiting half asleep behind the wheel, jolted upright when the back door opened. Min-jae didn't speak, didn't explain, just stared through the tinted window as the diner's flickering sign shrank in the distance. "Home, sir?" Home. Like that word meant something. Yes. The drive passed in a blur of neon and emptiness. Min-jae's mind replayed the moment over and over, the way she'd leaned forward, the warmth in her eyes, the 8 words that still echoed like they'd been carved into his bones. He pressed his palm against the window, felt the cool glass,
felt nothing, but beneath the nothing, something moved. He told himself it was nothing, told himself she was just a waitress, just a stranger, just someone who'd said something accidentally profound. People said things all the time. Words didn't change anything. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the next. 3 days passed in a fog of business he couldn't focus on, meetings he couldn't remember, conversations he drifted through like a ghost. His men noticed. Tony asked if he was sick. Min-jae almost laughed at that. Sick. What a luxury, to feel bad enough to be sick. The words followed him everywhere, into the penthouse, into the meetings, into the rare moments of silence when he sat alone and stared at nothing. 8 words. 8 small words from a woman in a wrinkled uniform who had no idea what she'd done. Someone who forgot they're allowed to hurt. He caught himself looking at his reflection more often, checking for something he couldn't name. The same face stared back every time. Sharp features, empty eyes. A man who'd been frozen so long he'd become the ice. On the 4th night, he told his driver to take the night off. He drove himself. Same route, same neighborhoods getting smaller and darker, same diner with the flickering sign, still standing, still open, still waiting at 3:47 a.m. The bell above the door chimed when he walked in. She looked up from behind the counter, and when she saw him, she smiled. Not surprised, not calculating, just happy, like she'd been expecting him, like she was glad he came back. "Booth's open? Coffee's fresh?" Min-jae walked to the same corner booth, sat in the same spot, watched her move through the diner with the same easy grace, topping off cups, wiping counters, existing in a way that seemed to take no effort at all. When she reached his table, she refilled his cup without asking. Then she sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed, the cook snored in the back. Somewhere outside, the city slept. "You came back," she said finally. "You knew I would." "Hope so. I've been working extra shifts just in case." She smiled again, warm and easy. "Didn't want to miss you." Min-jae didn't know what to say to that, didn't know what to do with someone who wanted to see him, who waited for him, who looked at him like he was worth waiting for. "You work a lot." Stupid, small, but it was something. "Gotta eat, gotta pay rent, gotta keep my little brother from making worse decisions than he already makes." She shrugged like it was nothing, like carrying that weight was just what you did. "What about you? You work a lot?" "You could say that. What do you do?" Min-jae considered lying, considered the easy answer, the safe answer, the one that would keep her at a distance where she belonged. Instead, he said, "I solve problems for people." She tilted her head, studying him with those warm eyes. "That why you look so tired? Solving everyone else's problems?" "You look tired? You look like someone who hasn't slept in days." She paused. Someone who's been thinking too hard about something someone said. Min-jae's jaw tightened. She saw too much, saw through him in ways no one else ever had. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt almost like relief. "Your words," he said quietly. "I haven't stopped hearing them." Alani nodded slowly, not triumphant, not smug, just present, just there with him in the moment. "Good," she said. "That's the first step." "First step to what?" She leaned forward, those warm eyes holding his. "First step to remembering." They talked for an hour after that. Small things, nothing important. She told him about her mother, gone 5 years now, who taught her to see the good in everyone. He told her about the city at night, how it looked from his penthouse, how the lights blurred into something almost beautiful. She laughed at something he said, actually laughed, not the nervous laugh people gave him, and the sound did something to his chest that he couldn't explain. When he finally stood to leave, the sun was threatening the horizon. Alani walked him to the door. "Same time next week?" she asked. Min-jae paused at the threshold, turned back, looked at this woman who'd walked into his life with 8 words and refused to leave his head. "Maybe sooner," he said.
He walked out into the pale morning light, and for the first time in 40 years, Cha Min-jae felt something stirring beneath the ice. Not pain, not yet, but the crack was widening, and somewhere deep inside, something was beginning to thaw.
3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. The diner became a ritual. Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, sometimes Sundays when the city felt too heavy and sleep wouldn't come. Min-jae would walk through the door at the same hour, sometimes 3:47 exactly, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but always when the world was quiet and the fluorescent lights hummed their tired song. Alani stopped asking why he came. She just started expecting him. She'd look up when the bell chimed, smile that warm smile, and nod toward the corner booth. Coffee would appear without words. Sometimes she'd sit with him between rushes. Sometimes she'd just work, letting him exist in her orbit, and that was enough. Min-jae learned things, small things. The way she tucked a stray curl behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she laughed with the truckers, genuine and warm, like everyone deserved kindness. The way her shoulders dropped when she talked about her mother, carrying grief like an old friend instead of a burden. She used to say everyone has a light inside them, Alani told him one night, staring at her coffee cup, even the ones who forgot how to shine it, especially them. Your mother sounds wise. She was. She also drove me crazy. Alani smiled, soft and sad. Told me I could do anything, be anyone. I believed her for a while. What happened? Life happened. Bills, responsibilities, a little brother who needed raising. She shrugged like it was nothing. The bakery I wanted to open? That's on hold. Maybe forever. Min-jae filed that information away. Bakery, dream, on hold. Another night, she told him about DJ. 18 years old, too fast for his own good, running with boys who had more money than sense and less sense than they needed. He's not bad, Alani said quickly, like she'd said it 1,000 times. He's just lost. Since Mom died, he's been looking for somewhere to belong, found the wrong somewhere. And you're trying to pull him back. Someone has to. She looked at Min-jae, really looked. You have anyone like that? Someone you do anything for? Min-jae considered the question. His men were loyal, but loyalty was business. His enemies respected him, but respect was fear. Was there anyone he'd do anything for? No, he said, and the word felt heavier than it should. Alani didn't pity him, didn't look away, just nodded like she understood something he hadn't said. Must be lonely, she said quietly, being that untouchable. Min-jae didn't answer, couldn't. But that night, driving home through empty streets, he felt the weight of her words settle somewhere deep. Lonely. He'd never thought of it that way, never allowed himself to think of it that way. His men certainly noticed the change. Tony cornered him after a meeting, expression caught between concern and confusion. Boss, you've been different lately, leaving at odd hours, coming back looking like you've actually slept. Is that a problem? It's unusual. Tony chose his words carefully. People are talking. The Japanese delegation asked if you were ill. The Gangnam crews are testing boundaries, seeing if you're distracted. Min-jae studied his head of security. 12 years of loyalty, 12 years of reading between lines. And what do you think? Am I distracted? Tony met his eyes. I think you found somewhere you'd rather be, and in our world, boss, wanting to be somewhere else is the same as distraction. Min-jae considered this, considered the truth in it, considered the fact that he didn't care. The crews test boundaries because they're stupid, he said finally. The Japanese delegation asks questions because they're nervous. None of it matters. What matters then? Min-jae thought of a diner at 3:47 a.m., fluorescent lights, warm eyes, a woman who saw him when no one else could. I'll let you know when I figure it out. He walked out, leaving Tony standing in the empty conference room, watching his boss become someone he didn't recognize. That night, Min-jae arrived at the diner with a box. Small, wrapped, nothing fancy. He set it on the table when Alani sat down. What's this? Open it? She did.
Inside was a leather journal, simple but quality, the kind you'd keep for years. Alani looked up, confusion in her eyes. "Your bakery," Minjae said. "Recipes, plans, things you want to remember." Alani stared at the journal, ran her fingers over the cover. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "You remembered." Minjae didn't know what to say. Of course he remembered. He remembered everything she said, every word, every laugh, every detail. "He talked about it," he said. "Seemed important." "It is important." She closed the journal, held it against her chest. "Thank you." They sat in silence after that, comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Later, walking to his car, Minjae realized something that should have terrified him. For the first time in 40 years, he had somewhere he wanted to be. For the first time in 40 years, he cared about someone. For the first time in 40 years, Cha Minjae was vulnerable. And he didn't care about that either.
The first night Alani didn't show, Minjae told himself it was nothing. People got sick. Shifts changed. Life happened. He sat in the corner booth until dawn, drinking coffee that grew cold, watching the door with every chime of the bell. She didn't come. The second night, he arrived earlier, left later, made excuses to the substitute waitress, a tired woman named Carol who didn't know him, didn't care about him, didn't look at him like he mattered. "She off tonight?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. "Alani? Yeah, personal stuff. She'll be back." Personal stuff. The words meant nothing and everything. He sat until the sun rose, telling himself he wasn't waiting, wasn't worried, wasn't feeling anything at all. He was lying. The third night, the booth felt like a cage. Every chime of the bell jerked his head toward the door. Every customer who walked in was the wrong face. Every minute that passed tightened something in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Carol noticed him watching, paused mid-pour. "You a friend of hers?" The word landed strange. Friend. Was that what he was? Was that what they'd become? "Yes," he said. And meant it. Carol's expression shifted. Something careful there now. Something worried. "She okay?" "Haven't heard from her in a couple days. That's not like Alani." Minjae's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Days. She hadn't been home in days. He left money on the table, more than enough, and walked out without another word. His phone was in his hand before he reached the car. Tony answered on the first ring. "Alani Rhodes, waitress at the Sunrise Diner in Mapo. I need everything. Where she lives, who she knows, where she's been the last 3 days. I need it yesterday." Silence on the other end. Then Tony's voice, careful and measured. "Boss, this is personal." "Yes." Personal investigations, they get complicated. People notice. People ask questions. "I don't care." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll have something in 2 hours." Minjae sat in his car, staring at the diner's flickering sign, and waited. 2 hours felt like 2 years. The file arrived at 2 a.m. Photos, addresses, phone records, surveillance footage from street cameras. Tony's team worked fast when they wanted to. Minjae read it in the car, the city sleeping around him, and felt something he hadn't felt in 40 years. Fear. Alani's apartment was empty. Neighbors hadn't seen her in 3 days. Her phone last pinged near a warehouse district on the city's edge, a district Minjae knew well, a district controlled by a ghost. Kong Sakjin. The name hit like a blade between the ribs. Kong had been his closest ally once, until Minjae's rise required his fall, until Minjae left him broken in a burning building, assumed dead, written off as collateral damage in the war for the city. But Kong wasn't dead. He was alive, and he'd found the perfect weapon. The file included photos of DJ, Alani's brother, young, stupid, desperate to belong. 3 nights ago, he'd been seen meeting with Kong's people. 2 nights ago, Alani had gone looking for him. Now both were missing. Minjae stared at the photos. Alani's face, warm and alive, smiling in some candid shot he shouldn't have. DJ's face, so young, so lost,
so much like the boys Min-jae had recruited years ago when he was building his empire. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Ja Min-jae. The voice was burned sand and old hatred. It's been a long time. Min-jae's grip tightened on the phone. Kong. I have something of yours, I think. A waitress with kind eyes and a stupid brother. A pause. She talks about you, you know. Doesn't know who you really are. Doesn't know the monster who's been sitting in her booth. Min-jae said nothing. His mind raced through options, exits, angles. Touch her and you'll what? Feel something? Kong laughed, and the sound was broken glass. That's the joke, isn't it? The great Cha Min-jae who feels nothing. But I wonder. His voice dropped, soft and poisonous. I wonder if that's still true. She's pretty. Kind. The kind of woman who could make even the monster care. The line went dead. Min-jae lowered the phone, stared at his reflection in the dark window, saw something he'd never seen there before. Terror. Not for himself. For her. For the first time in 40 years, Cha Min-jae had something to lose. For the first time in 40 years, he could be hurt. And the man who wanted to hurt him knew exactly where to strike.
The warehouse sat on the edge of the city, where Seoul forgot itself and industry took over. Rusted shipping containers, broken streetlights, the kind of place where screams went unanswered and bodies disappeared. Min-jae knew it well. He'd built his empire in places like this. He stood in the shadows across the street, watching. Tony flanked him, silent and tense. Behind them, a dozen of Min-jae's best waited in the dark, weapons ready, orders clear. But Min-jae hadn't given the order yet. He couldn't. Because this wasn't a business operation. This wasn't territory or debt or reputation. This was her, Alani, the woman with warm eyes and 8 words that shattered everything. And the man holding her was someone Min-jae had created. You should let us go in, Tony said quietly. Standard extraction. We've done it 100 times. Not like this. Boss, it's the same. Hostage situation, armed captors. We go in hard, we get her out. It's not the same. Min-jae's voice was flat, but something moved beneath it. Nothing about this is the same. Tony fell silent. He learned years ago when to push and when to wait. Min-jae's mind replayed the file photos. Kang Sok-jin, 20 years ago, standing beside him as they took their first territory together, brothers in everything but blood. They'd trusted each other with their lives, their secrets, their futures. Then the future demanded a choice. The organization could only have one leader. Min-jae made his move, and Kang fell hard, fell into a burning building that should have been his grave. But graves sometimes spit people back out. Now Kang was inside that warehouse, with Alani, with DJ, with the only person who'd made Min-jae feel human in 40 years. Min-jae's hand drifted to the gun at his ribs. Familiar weight, familiar tool. He'd used it 100 times, 1,000, without hesitation, without feeling. This time, his fingers trembled. He stared at the tremor, fascinated, terrified. 40 years of perfect control, and one woman had undone it in weeks. Boss, Tony's voice pulled him back. We need a decision. Every minute we wait. I know. Min-jae closed his eyes, saw Alani's face, her smile when he gave her the journal, her laugh that did something to his chest, her 8 words, still echoing. Someone who forgot they're allowed to hurt. He opened his eyes. I'm going in alone. Tony's face went pale. Absolutely not. That's suicide. It's not a request. Boss, think about this. Kang wants you alone. That's the trap. You walk in there without backup, you're giving him exactly what he wants. Min-jae turned to face his head of security. Tony flinched. Not at the danger. Tony had seen danger. He flinched at what he saw in his boss's eyes. Something human.
If I go in with an army, he kills her before we breach. You know that. We both know that. Min-jae's voice was calm, the calm of someone who'd already made their choice. This is the only way. Then let me go. Let one of us. She's mine, Tony. The words hung in the air. Mine. Possessive. Primal. Everything Min-jae had never been. Tony studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. What do you need? Min-jae looked back at the warehouse. Somewhere inside, Alani was waiting, scared, hoping someone would come. I need you to listen. If I'm not out in 30 minutes, you go in loud. Everyone, everything. Burn it to the ground. And you? Min-jae checked his gun. No backup, no vest, no safety net. If I'm not out in 30 minutes, he said quietly, I won't need saving. He walked toward the warehouse alone. Each step felt like breaking something. Each step felt like becoming something. The monster he'd been or the man he wanted to be. He didn't know which one would walk through that door. He only knew he couldn't go back. Behind him, Tony watched his boss disappear into the shadows, and for the first time in 12 years, he prayed. The warehouse door creaked open. Min-jae stepped inside and came face to face with his past.
The warehouse smelled like rust and blood and the past. Kang Sok-jin sat on a crate in the center of the space, legs crossed, smile wide. He looked older. 40 years of hatred would do that, but his eyes were the same, sharp, waiting, hungry. Behind him, tied to chairs near the back wall, Alani and her brother. DJ's face was swollen, bloody. Alani looked unhurt but pale, terror in her eyes when she saw Min-jae walk in alone. She started to speak. Kang's man behind her clamped a hand over her mouth. Min-jae's jaw tightened, but he didn't move, didn't react. 40 years of control held him steady. Alone, Kang said, almost admiring. I didn't think you'd actually do it. The great Cha Min-jae walking into a trap for a woman. He laughed, and the sound scraped against Min-jae's nerves. What happened to you? Where's the man who left me to burn? Still here. No. Kang stood, walking slow circles around the space. That man felt nothing. That man wouldn't cross the street for anyone. That man was a ghost. He stopped, facing Min-jae. You're not a ghost anymore. You're just a man, and men can be broken. Min-jae's hand stayed at his side, not reaching for his gun. Not yet. Let them go, Kang. This is between us. Oh, it's between us, definitely. Kang gestured, and his men stepped forward, 4 of them, armed, positioned between Min-jae and the chairs. But they're the reason you're here. They're the reason you feel something, and I want you to feel everything before you die. Alani struggled against her bonds. Min-jae caught her eyes for just a moment, saw fear, saw hope, saw something else, belief. She believed he could fix this. She didn't know what he was. Or maybe she did. Maybe she'd always known. Kang pulled a knife, not toward Min-jae, toward Alani. He held it up, letting the light catch the blade, letting Min-jae see where this was going. Here's how this works, Kang said softly. You watch, you feel, and then when there's nothing left of you but pain, I kill you too. That's the revenge, not your death, your suffering. Min-jae's vision tunneled. The warehouse, the men, the knife, all of it shrank to one point. Alani's face, scared but still looking at him, still believing. And in that moment, he heard her voice, not from the warehouse, from before, from that first night. Someone who forgot they're allowed to hurt. He'd thought she meant physical pain, thought she meant the numbness in his nerves, his body, his life. But standing there, watching a blade point at the only person who'd ever seen him, he understood. She meant this. She meant caring, loving, losing. She meant the terror of having something to lose. She meant that hurting wasn't the curse. It was the proof
Proof that you were alive. Proof that you'd loved. Proof that you were human. Kang took a step toward Alani. Min-jae moved. Not toward his gun, not toward violence, toward something else entirely. He dropped to his knees. The warehouse went silent. Kang stared. His men froze. Even Alani's eyes went wide. "What are you doing?" Kang's voice cracked with confusion. Min-jae looked up at the man he'd once called brother. "You want revenge. Take it, but let them go first." Kang laughed, hollow, disbelieving. "You're begging? The great Cha Min-jae is begging?" "I'm choosing." Min-jae's voice was steady, calm, the calm of someone who'd finally found something worth losing everything for. "I spent 40 years feeling nothing. She gave me back the hurt, and hurt means I'm alive. Hurt means I love her. Hurt means I'd rather die on my knees than become you again." Kang's face twisted. This wasn't the revenge he'd planned. This wasn't victory. This was something he couldn't understand. "Kill him," Kang spat. "Kill them all." His men moved. So did Min-jae. Not for violence, for Alani. He launched himself toward her, shielding her body with his own as gunfire erupted. And then the warehouse doors exploded inward. Tony and his men flooded the space, guns blazing, years of precision turning chaos into control. Kang's men fell. Kang himself scrambled, grabbed, tried to flee. Tony's bullet caught him in the leg. He went down screaming. Min-jae stayed where he was, wrapped around Alani, waiting for bullets that never came. When he finally looked up, the warehouse was still. Kang's men were down. Tony stood over Kang's writhing body, gun trained, waiting for orders. Min-jae looked at Alani, terrified, shaken, alive. "You came," she whispered. "Always." He helped her stand, helped her brother stand, led them both toward the doors, toward the night air, toward something he'd never had before, a reason to feel. Behind him, Kang screamed curses, promises of revenge, all the things broken men say when they lose. Min-jae didn't look back. He'd already become someone new, someone who could hurt, someone who could love, someone who could choose. And that someone was walking out into the light.
The safe house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies every breath, every shift, every unspoken word hanging in the air like smoke. Alani sat on the edge of a worn couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. DJ slept in the next room, sedated by the medics Tony had called, his injuries treated, his future uncertain. But Alani couldn't sleep, couldn't stop staring at the man across the room. Min-jae stood by the window, back to her, watching the street below. His suit was still immaculate. No blood, no dirt, no sign that he'd just walked through hell to reach her. Except for his hands. They trembled slightly at his sides. She'd never seen his hands tremble before. "You should rest," he said without turning. "Who are you?" The question hung between them. Min-jae's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't answer immediately, didn't turn, just stood there, silhouetted against the city lights, a ghost in an expensive suit. "You know who I am." "I know who I thought you were." Alani's voice shook, but not from cold. "A quiet man who came to my diner, who listened, who remembered things I said, who gave me a journal for my dreams." She paused, swallowing hard. "That man wasn't real." Min-jae turned then, faced her fully, and for the first time Alani saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Pain. "He was real," Min-jae said quietly. "He just wasn't complete." Tony had told her on the drive over. Not everything, just enough. Cha Min-jae, the name that ran Seoul's underworld. The man who'd built an empire on fear and blood. The monster who couldn't be hurt, couldn't be stopped, couldn't be reached. The man who'd sat in her diner for weeks, drinking her coffee, listening to her talk about bakeries and brothers and dreams.
"He's the man who killed people," Alani whispered, "who destroyed lives, who—" Yes. The word was simple, honest, no defense, no excuse. Alani felt something crack inside her chest. Betrayal, loss, the grief of realizing something beautiful had been built on something terrible. All those nights, all those conversations, was any of it real? Min-jae moved then, slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile. He crossed the room and sat on the coffee table in front of her, close enough to touch but not touching, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the redness at the edges of his eyes, the thing moving beneath his usual stillness. Every word, every moment, every time I sat in that booth, I was exactly where I wanted to be, not because of the coffee, because of you. But you lied! I didn't tell you everything. That's different from lying. He held her gaze. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. You? Afraid? Terrified. His voice dropped. I haven't felt anything in 40 years. Not pain, not joy, not grief. Nothing. I was a ghost walking through a world I couldn't touch. And then you looked at me, really looked, and you said, "Someone who forgot they're allowed to hurt." Alani finished quietly. Min-jae nodded. Those words cracked something open, something I'd frozen so long I forgot it existed. And every night after that, sitting with you, listening to you, watching you, I felt more than I'd felt in decades. He paused. You didn't make me feel pain. You made me feel everything. Alani stared at him, the monster who couldn't be hurt, the man who just walked into a warehouse alone to save her, the same man who'd given her a journal for her bakery dreams. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know who you are. Min-jae reached into his pocket, pulled out something small, held it out to her. The journal, the one he'd given her. He must have grabbed it from her apartment during the rescue. You know who I said I was. I'm the man who remembers everything you say, who stays awake night replaying your laugh, who'd walk into 100 warehouses if it meant keeping you safe. He placed the journal in her hands. I'm the man you saw in that booth. That was never a lie. Alani looked down at the journal, ran her fingers over the cover, thought about the weeks of conversations, the way he listened, the way he looked at her like she mattered. You killed people, she whispered. Yes. You've done terrible things. Yes. Can someone like that change? Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I don't know, but I know I want to. For the first time in my life, I want to be someone different. He met her eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to forget what I am. I'm just asking you to see me, really see me, one more time. Alani held his gaze, saw the fear there, the hope, the thing cracking through 40 years of ice. She didn't answer, not yet. But she didn't look away either.
4 months, 17 weeks, 119 days. Min-jae counted each one. Not because he was waiting, not because he expected anything, because counting was something to do with the hours that stretched too long, and the nights that came too often, and the booth at the diner that stayed empty no matter when he arrived. He still went, every Tuesday, sometimes Thursdays, always at 3:47 a.m., though he didn't know why the time mattered anymore. Habit, maybe, or penance, or the stubborn hope that one night the door would chime and she'd walk through it. She never did. Carol worked her shifts. New waitresses came and went. The cooks still snored in the back. The fluorescent lights still hummed their tired song. But the corner booth stayed empty across from his, and the coffee tasted like nothing, and Min-jae sat in alone in the hour between late and early, watching the door. His men noticed the change. Tony reported that the organization had never run smoother.
Min-jae was sharper, more focused, more present than he'd been in years. The Gangnam crews stopped testing boundaries. The Japanese delegation stopped asking questions. The empire hummed like a well-oiled machine. But Tony also noticed the way his boss looked at empty booths, the way he'd pause mid-sentence, staring at nothing, the way something in his eyes had softened, cracked, let light in, but also let loneliness through. "You could find her," Tony said one night. "You know where she lives. Where her brother went, you could—" "No." "Why not?" Min-jae had considered that question for 4 months, turned it over in his mind like a stone, looking for answers underneath. "Because she needed to choose," he said finally, "and choosing takes time." Tony didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. That was why he'd stayed 12 years. The diner that night was emptier than usual. A trucker in the corner, Carol reading a magazine, the cook's snores drifting through the service window. Min-jae sat in his booth, coffee untouched, watching his own reflection in the window. Same face, same eyes, but something different behind them now, something that hadn't been there before. Feeling. He felt the cold of the window when he pressed his palm against it, felt the ache in his back from sitting too long, felt the weight of 4 months pressing down on his chest like something almost physical. It hurt. God, it hurt. He'd never been so grateful for anything in his life. The door chimed. Min-jae didn't look up, didn't let himself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what cracked him open in the first place. Footsteps crossed the diner floor, slow, steady, familiar. A coffee pot appeared at the edge of his vision. Warm liquid filled his cup. Steam rose between them. And then she sat down across from him. Min-jae looked up. Alani looked back. Same warm eyes, same easy presence, same everything he'd carried in his chest for 4 months. She was tired, shadows under her eyes, something heavier in her shoulders. But she was here. She was real. She was looking at him like she'd never left. Neither of them spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed. The cook snored. The world turned outside, indifferent to what was happening in a run-down diner at 3:47 a.m. Alani reached across the table, slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Her fingers touched his, warm, real, alive. 4 months, she said quietly. I needed to think, needed to decide if I could live with who you are. Min-jae waited. His heart, did hearts beat faster? He thought his might be. I thought about the women you've hurt, the families you've destroyed, the things you've done. Her voice was steady, but something moved in her eyes. And I thought about the man who gave me a journal for my dreams, who listened to every word I said, who walked into a warehouse alone to save me and my brother. She squeezed his hand. I can't erase what you were, but I can choose what you become. She met his eyes. I choose to stay. Min-jae felt something building behind his eyes, something he'd never felt before. Not in 40 years of emptiness, 40 years of ice, 40 years of being the man who couldn't be touched. Do you remember, he said, voice rough, what you said to me that first night? Alani smiled, soft, sad, hopeful. You look like someone who forgot they're allowed to hurt. The words landed like they always did, but this time something broke loose. Min-jae's vision blurred, his chest heaved, and for the first time since he was 8 years old, falling from a tree and feeling nothing, a tear slid down his cheek. Not from sadness, not from pain, from relief, from the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful relief of finally feeling something real. Alani watched it fall, watched it trace a path down the face of the most dangerous man in Seoul, and instead of fear, instead of disgust, instead of anything that she should have felt, she smiled. There you are, she whispered. I've been waiting to meet you. Min-jae couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but sit there, tears falling, ice cracking, light pouring through every broken place. The ice wasn't gone. It would never fully be gone. 40 years of numbness left scars that didn't heal overnight. But it was cracked, and light was finally getting through. And across from him, holding his hand like he was something precious, sat the woman who'd done the cracking. The fluorescent lights hummed, the cook snored, the world kept turning. And Cha Min-jae, for the first time in 40 years, let himself feel it all.
The story teaches that it is better to feel pain than to feel nothing at all. Because pain means you loved. Pain means you cared. Pain means you were brave enough to be human. And in the end, that bravery is the only thing that truly matters. Loved what you watched? Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and tap the notification bell so you're always first to know when we drop new content. See you in the next video.